could hear the shouting and the roaring, and I was like, yes. We are so ending on a high, and that's just such an amazing feeling. It's going to be like a nerd workout. We're going to leave today ready to go to the bar and discuss and chat, but we've got one more incredible act. It seems impossible to follow something as wonderful as what Priya just told us, but we're going to try. So, next up, and for our final talk of the day, we're going to zoom out from design a bit and look at the wider role of creativity and how that plays a role in creating hope in the climate crisis. So who do we have? We've got Brian Eno. We've got Tori Tsui. Two more lifelong eco-activists. They're working together on Brian's new charity, Earth%. And they believe that creativity can help us collectively navigate eco-anxiety, as set out in Tori's book, It's Not Just You, which is an amazing title. Please welcome them onto the stage along with their host, Max Fraser, the editorial director for Dezeen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was having a giggle earlier with a friend who said, oh, you've got the graveyard slot, the last slot of the day. I said, no, we just saved the best for last. It's really, really, really wonderful to be here this afternoon with two wonderful people. I have Tori Tsui sitting next to me in the middle here, climate justice campaigner and author. I have Brian Eno, a musician and artist, and indeed both of them are lifelong climate activists too. We've got a whiz-bang 30 minutes, as you will have got used to today. We're going to talk about the role of creativity in times of crisis, eco-anxiety and mental health, how to inspire collective action, and the responsibility creatives like all of you carry and the legacy they can leave. 30 minutes isn't a long time, so let's just dive straight into it. One of the things that I was really interested in when I was asked to do this talk was the pairing of you two together. And I was wondering if, for the purposes of maybe other people in the room who might be wondering the same thing, could you just explain how you've come to work together? Brian.
About 4 years ago, I started with my godson, actually, an organization called Earth%. And the intention of Earth% was to try to drag the music business into the environmental fight. There's a lot of money goes through the music business, and we thought maybe we can siphon a little of that off and do something useful with it. So we were looking for an advisory board, and Tori is one of the people we chose to be on the advisory board. So that's how that started. In fact, the interesting thing about Earth% is that it's become this sort of community of artists who happen to share that interest, to share the interest of trying to do something to prevent total catastrophe in the world, although most of us have accepted that we're already in catastrophe phase, but we'll talk about that later.
We will.
Anyway, so Tori was one of our first choice, really, as an expert advisor.
Great. And Tori, what are some of the projects that you're specifically working on together?
Well, alongside kind of working on the Earth% initiative, I'm also a senior advisor for an organization called the Fossil Fuel Treaty, who Earth% actually support. And Brian's been an amazing advocate for the work that we do at the Fossil Fuel Treaty, and I'll get into what we do later on. But on top of that, Brian and I are working together on a concert that's taking place at Wembley on the 17th of September called Together for Palestine, which is bringing together people from all walks of life. In hopes to show the world that we are here on the side of Palestinian people, to raise vital funds for organizations on the ground in Gaza, and to give artists and change makers a chance to show their solidarity on a big stage at Wembley.
Yes, and that is indeed next week, I believe, completely
Where
sold
Brian
out.
will be performing.
Yes, I'll be performing. Not only me, you'll be pleased to know. That's on the 17th, and it's sold out, unfortunately.
Yes.
We should have booked the big Wembley. We got the 12,500 seater. We should have taken the 90,000.
Wow. Well, good luck with that. Makes this feel small.
Piece of cake, this one.
Yeah.
Tori, you frame Palestine as a climate issue. I was wondering, it's perhaps obvious to some and not to others. Could you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of particular advocacy that I do is climate justice, which understands that the climate crisis is underpinned by a series of systemic forms of oppression, including the colonization of our earth, the social injustices that create inequality. And Palestine is a very, very archetype example of that taking place, where we have a very clear oppressor and we have people who are being oppressed. If we're going to be crude and talk about carbon emissions, we can't ignore the fact that the military-industrial complex is the single biggest industrial carbon emitter, and regrettably, that's not something that I see echoed in UNFCCC spaces, and it's not something that I think the mainstream environmental movement has really sort of risen to the occasion in being in support of Palestinian people. But you know, that connection is so evident, and it's precisely why my comrade and friend Greta Thunberg is sailing to Gaza at the moment on the Samud flotilla, which was bombed, might I add, this morning. So solidarity to them, and may they be safe in their onward journey. But yes, Palestine is a very clear climate justice issue. There is no climate justice without a free Palestine and freedom for all oppressed people, and it's why I think I'm such a vocal advocate for Palestinian people, but also on the basis of shared humanity. I don't want to live in a world where we can witness a genocide and our government be complicit in it.
Tori, you take the stance that the world is designed to make people struggle.
Yeah.
Our societal and economic order is keeping us busy with the wrong things. This is a big question,
Yeah.
but what do you think fundamentally needs to change for us to create a world of cohesion and progress?
Absolutely. Well, I like to start things off by saying where we are and laying the land, which is that we live in a neoliberal capitalist society where the concept of meritocracy, that if you just work hard you'll succeed, is so baked in to the backbone of people's psyches. And what that does is it's a huge disservice to our collective and shared humanity. It fosters individualism. It creates a culture of competition instead of collaboration. And you know, as you said, designed, I do believe the world was designed to make certain people struggle more than others. I do believe that there is an inherent sort of belief that if people just simply work hard, that they will deserve the life on the basis of how hard they work, and that is a complete farce. When it comes to creating the world that I want to see, I don't want a world that's typified by commodified care and competition and humans being oppressed and pitted against one another. I really believe that so much of what we can achieve, especially addressing something like the climate crisis, can be built through collective action, but also by addressing the uncomfortable topics in the room. I think that activism is inherently an uncomfortable and a disruptive practice, and I often say to people that if I'm not making you uncomfortable, I'm not doing my job very well. And so I think that with that, I'd like to shout out the Fossil Fuel Treaty, which I mentioned very briefly, which Brian and Earth% support. It's essentially a framework that addresses the elephant in the room, the fossil fuel industry, who are directly responsible for the climate crisis. And I'm not just talking about carbon parts per million, I'm talking about the sheer level of propaganda and political infiltration into decision-making spaces like the UNFCCC. And the Fossil Fuel Treaty addresses the fact that our very own Paris Agreement, which was signed nearly 10 years ago in Paris, does not mention fossil fuels, and it doesn't account for the key perpetrators of this crisis, and that is completely by design. There are so many loopholes that allow these companies to keep extracting at the hands of ordinary people who are bearing the brunt of this crisis. And what the Fossil Fuel Treaty does is it says, enough is enough. We have to address this. We're not going to allow for the expansion of coal, oil and gas, and we're going to make sure that we champion a just transition in the process. And the brilliant thing is, each and every single one of you can endorse this treaty. Even your organizations or companies that you work for can take a stand and say, we want to be part of this movement, and I think that's really powerful.
I'll repeat that. Each and every one of you can endorse this treaty. I have done so myself. Brian, you're a lifelong believer in the role of art and creativity in bringing people together to imagine how we could do things differently, and indeed you're pushing for collective action a lot of the time as well. Can you give us some examples of your own work and perhaps the work of others, that particularly ones that are linked to the climate crisis in this, as it relates to this?
Yeah, I have to answer. By the way, I just want to ask everyone, can you all hear Tori? Because I can't hear her very well. Is it just me?
Should we turn the mic up? Perhaps a very softly spoken person as well.
I can hear you.
You can hear? I can't hear her very well sitting here. Maybe it's just age.
Didn't want to say that.
Yes, it is rather quiet on stage. I'll agree.
Yeah.
No, to answer your question, I have to go a little bit deeper than an obvious answer, which is to try to see how does art and culture change a society? What does it do for us? Why do we want art? Why do we do it? And I think what you're really talking about, if you ask that question, is what is the soil in which a society grows? So we tend to think about art and culture as by looking at the flowers, like the Picassos and the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and so on. But in fact, it's all of the kind of aesthetic choices we make, the choices we make about design and lifestyle and so on. All of those things fall into the big category called art to me. And I think we do it because art is a place where we can model alternatives and see how they feel. Novels are a very easy way of seeing how that works. When you read a novel, what you're doing is surrendering to another world with a different set of characters and a different set of conditions, and you're seeing how that world works. And so each novel is a picture of how things could otherwise be. If it's a sci-fi novel, it's a picture of how things could be in some possible future. But I think all art works in that way. It shows you a little world, and the payoff of that is finding out how you feel about that world. If you read 1984, for instance, you know how you feel about a totalitarian society. So I could give you thousands of examples, but there's no time. So what artists are doing, I think, is they're little antennae. They're seeing how things feel. How would it feel to live in a world like this? And a world like this can mean a fashion statement. A fashion statement isn't just an arbitrary set of signs. It's a set of things that are different from where you are now. So how do those differences feel? Does it feel better to be sharp and cut? Does it feel better to be soft and fluffy? Those things have meaning to us. And I think what we're doing in art is always trying to experiment with how different things could feel. And so it means that I can't give you very many direct answers to your question, because what you would like is for me to say, well, when Picasso painted La Guernica, everybody felt differently about war. It's not usually as simple as that. That would be maybe a single example of it, but mostly it doesn't work like that. I think mostly it changes the way we feel about everything in a perhaps quite small way. But we are constantly immersing ourselves in these little shifts of feelings and consensuses that we share. Sorry, I told you that would be a long answer.
That's okay.
But it could have been a lot longer, so you should be grateful.
And you recently put out a book called What is Art For? And indeed it expands on a lot of...
on these questions,
yes.
These
points.
What Art Does, it's called.
Yeah. Sorry, yes, What Art Does. As a side note, I know that you're also a lifelong New Scientist subscriber, which also, to me, shows that you're as much in the creative realm, but also wanting to know and understand the actual science that grounds a lot of what we're talking about.
Yes, I think that's one of the things we have in common, actually. I'm very interested in science and in where it's going, and also in the difference between art and science. I think science discovers and art digests. That's the very simple distinction I can make between them. I don't think art is about facts, and I don't think it's about truth, which a lot of people think that it is. I think that's a romantic concept. I think it's about play. I think children learn through play. We all understand that. Everybody watches children and realizes what they're doing is discovering how hard this is and whether this will break and what I can say to her that I couldn't say to him, so on and so on. So children play to learn, but I think adults do art to play. Play is an adult art form. Art is an adult play form, you might say. And I think that's how we keep learning things. Science is the other way we keep learning things, but they're quite distinct from one another. One wants to look at reality and find out what it is. We want to think about what other realities could be. So there's a bit of a difference between them. Sorry, these are very truncated answers to the most fucking difficult question.
Yes. And that most threatening of clocks continues to tick. Tori, I wanted to talk about anxiety, because indeed there is a lot of anxiety in the world right now, especially among young people. And I think, as you can attest, working actively in climate justice is full of grief and stress and trauma, which you also have to endure. Why is the climate crisis a mental health as well as an environmental crisis?
Yeah, I kind of want to start this by saying that any reaction which doesn't sort of emulate grief or some form of distress or anger would concern me. I think it's a very proportionate and realistic and justified reaction to the world that we live in. And I think there's this tendency, unfortunately, for people to pathologize grief and to say that it's not justified or that it is as a result of our own doing. I mean, if we wanted to, we could speak all day about these concepts of chemical imbalances in the brain, but I don't have that time. And I'm not saying that people aren't predisposed to certain struggles, but in a biological sense. But I think this idea of biological determinism is a huge disservice to what it means to be human in a time such as now. And as an environmentalist and as someone who works in climate, I've often seen mental health be siloed from the campaigning work that I do, but I see it as very much part of it. I write in my book that often this idea of environmental versus mental health is, quite frankly, not a separation. It's deeply intertwined, and it's as a result of the fact that as humans we are incredibly connected to the earth. I do think that the society we live in has created a severance that makes it very difficult to feel like you're part of an earth, but we are, whether we see that in ourselves or not. And by virtue of that, if you are living on this planet, if you are part of this planet, if you see yourself as intertwined with the planet, you are a direct reflection of how much it is suffering. And if you aren't, well, then there are ways that we learn to placate ourselves, or certain privileges that afford us this option to tap out and to feel slightly numb or disconnected from the earth. I think that so often there is this notion that as an activist I should be quite forthcoming and strong and be a beacon of hope. But I feel a lot of grief, and I think that I don't want to romanticize it per se, but I do think that it is inherent to the work that I do, because this is a very difficult and depressing time for us and for anyone who's really got their eyes wide open. And again, kind of talking about design and struggle, I do think that the current status quo has designed a system that means that if you are either aware of what's happening or actively resisting it, you are going to be suffering as a result. And it's no surprise there, because we have a government that is condemning and creating extremely strict laws and prescribing organizations that are actively trying to resist a genocide in Palestine, and those people are suffering as a result. So I think we have to be really conscious of that.
Can I just add something to this? I think a lot of what motivates both starting with Earth Percent and the engagement with Palestine is realizing that your governments aren't going to do anything about it. So you either say, okay, so it's not my problem, they should have done something about it, or you do something about it yourself. It's not a difficult choice, actually. I've been to Palestine 3 times, and it's the degree of humiliation there that is visited on people every single day is almost as bad as the bombings. It's just so disgusting. And I can't pretend that I don't notice that. And I think, speaking of numbness, you're saying that numbness is one of the options that faces you when you're buried in the tsunami of bad information about what the environment is going to become like. The other thing that I think is a kind of sickness is suppression. When you try to pretend that something isn't happening when you know that it really is. And when you try to excuse yourself from thinking about it. And of course the world is rich in ways of excusing yourself. Distraction is the biggest industry in the world right now. Advertising is number 2, but distraction is really the biggest industry. The way of somehow diverting your energy and your attention into something that somebody else would like you to be attending to. So my friend John Hassel, the late composer, used to have a very simple sentence that I liked very much. He said, the most important question you can ask yourself is, what do I really like? Now this seems such a trivial question when you first think about it, but then when you remember that 5,000 or 10,000 times a day somebody is telling you what you ought to like, how you ought to feel about something, how you ought to spend your money, where you ought to put your attention, that becomes a very important question. And to try to remember what it was that you felt and that you wanted to do is a real effort. It's a real discipline. You have to just somehow shut the rest of the shit out and try to hear that voice that was in you. And I think suppression of any kind, the kind of suppression that Israeli society is going to feel for the next 20 or 30 years when they look back on this weird, manic period that they've been through, that's a sickness. There will be a sickness, just like there was a sickness in Germany for 30 years after the war. You cannot suppress stuff like that and not expect it to react with you.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, that's my preach.
I just wanted to talk about hope for a moment, if I can. Because, of course, for all the endless talk about needing to act fast on the climate before it's too late, and indeed we place a lot of reliance, I think, on hope, perhaps we should reframe it that we're already in a process of collapse. And indeed, from that stance, what does reconstructing from the rubble look like for you?
So, I think I've accepted that idea that we are already in catastrophe. There's a very good book written by an American friend of mine called A Better Catastrophe. So he's an environmentalist, Andrew Boyd, his name is. He said, we're already in a mess. We won't get out of it. So let's just try to make the best mess that we can. And that's sort of where I am. And one of the things that occurred to me about a few years ago was this understanding. I've got a big studio and I often let it out to people to use to do things like what we're talking about, and I noticed that I'd have group after group of people coming in and talking, and I'd realized that they didn't know about each other. There's this group of people who are interested in this thing, and it overlaps so much with that thing, and they don't know about each other. So I thought, what makes a movement? What makes a community of thought? It's when people know about each other. You know, they're useless as individuals. None of us is strong enough as an individual to fight the amount of money that is up against us. we have to make communities together. So my feeling has always been since then to try to make a working community, and I think Earth% has become one of those. I have another one that meets regularly in the studio called Hard Art, which is academics and anarchists and architects and anthropologists, and all through the alphabet.
It's a real motley crew.
And this seems to me to be the work we should be doing now, that don't try to do it alone. Find the others,
Absolutely.
as Douglas Rushkoff says.
And at that point, would encourage you all to connect at this event. You can do so, I believe, through the app, because indeed this conversation and community needs to grow and continue after this event. And I did want to just touch upon that, because of course today we've heard, and tomorrow we will hear, of lots of great examples of how design is playing a positive role. But perhaps there's a danger that we assume other people are going to carry the good work forward, or we feel overwhelmed ourselves and therefore we don't do anything. Tori, after this event, how do we, all of us in this room, avoid falling back into a sort of business as usual position?
Well, firstly, I want to say that each and every one of you is in such a unique position of privilege as someone who has a foot in the door of design, or you might have a creative mind. You are the architects of the world, both in terms of thought and structure. And that is an immense privilege, and it means that often so many of us are at the mercy of what you decide to do with your imagination. And I want to leave that with you as almost like a plea to use your imagination to rewrite somebody else's, because remember that every single thing that we are bearing witness to is the product of someone's imagination, and that doesn't inherently mean it's a good one or a good thing, but what can be imagined can be reimagined. And so I'd like to implore you all to walk away and think, like, what world would you actually like to create and leave behind, whether it be for your sake or your children's sake or your loved one's sake. And I think that it is very easy to fall back into this rhetoric of business as usual. I can't tell you how many stages I've been on where I've said something emphatic and it's fallen on deaf ears, and then people have kind of gone away and mulled it over, and perhaps things have changed, perhaps they haven't. But what I can say is that every time I get on this stage, I will never, ever lose this concept of hope. I know that it can become quite an arbitrary word, but what Brian was saying about this sort of a better mess, every fraction of a degree matters, every life saved matters, and it's about all that we can save now, and that's what motivates me, and I hope that it motivates you.
Perhaps I can. Yeah, I'd like to add something to that as well.
Please.
Even if you don't know how to do something yourself, or if you're not in a position to do something, just help somebody who is doing something.
Absolutely.
It's not about you rising to the top and being the star of the environmental movement. It's about trying to get a result. And if you see somebody else who's working on it, it could be an organization or it could be an individual, help them, support them, even at the minimum, celebrate them. You know, when I think of the people who are celebrated in this society, generally, and then I think, who are the people who are really making a difference? I mean, I remember one of the great moments in COVID was realizing that all those people like postal workers and policemen and postmen and, you know, all the ordinary people turned out to be very important people. Nobody was fucking worried that financiers weren't getting to work. You know, it turns out there's a lot of people doing shit that is not of any use. And we pay them the most.
We're actually out of time, so I'm going to jump to my final question in a moment, but I just wanted to read out a quote from the Long Now Foundation, which is something that you also established, advocating for long-term thinking, which is something you talked about. Our highest hope is that the next generations will never doubt that we thought of them and built for them. I thought that was a really beautiful reminder, an obvious one perhaps, but a really beautiful reminder for us all to ponder. Brian's design principles for the street, I would also encourage you to read. Something on there, think like a gardener, not an architect. Design beginnings, not endings. Also a wonderful thought to ponder there. As we wrap up, of course, we're very privileged to sit on this stage, and we've heard from a wonderful array of voices today. But are there some underrepresented individuals or communities who don't have the privilege of this stage that both of you could indeed platform? I'm stealing that idea from somebody I would like to platform, by the way. A climate corruption journalist called Rachel Donald, who has a podcast called Planet Critical, which I would encourage you all to listen to. And she always finishes her interviews with this very question. And so, Rachel, thank you. I'm going to copy you and do the same. Who would like to answer first? Tori.
I'll go. I'd like this opportunity to platform a phenomenal Palestinian climate justice activist called Mohammed Ashraf, who founded the Palestine Institute for Climate Strategy. They're launching a manifesto in the coming weeks which targets and looks at the intersection between the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel industry, and the ongoing genocide of Palestinians. And you can find out more about his organization at PICS, P-I-C-S.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tori. Brian.
This is a hard question to answer, but I think I would like to champion all the outsiders. Now, those of you who are interested in art might know there's such a thing as outsider art, and it's often done by people who don't call themselves artists and who aren't recognized within the art world as artists. And it turns out that they're making some of the most interesting art. I think in nearly every business now, the outsiders turn out to be the interesting people. Politicians are not very interesting. Outsider people who are circling around politics are where all the action is. And I think we've really got to stop looking at the people who have the titles and start looking at the people who are doing things. So my seat on the stage would be full of about 2.5 billion people who are the actual people who are making things work. The people who turn up at demonstrations every week. The people who write to the BBC and tell them that their programming is shit. It's not general. Sorry, I don't want to slander the BBC because I thoroughly enjoy a lot of what they do, but their political programming is currently pretty warped. So it's only on that part of it I'm concerned. But there are so many people who are already doing good things. They never get written about.
Yeah.
They never get noticed, and we're still fucking looking at things about the Kardashians. Don't be distracted. There's an industry designed to prevent you from being effective at anything. It's a huge industry. Just don't listen to it. You must set your own agenda.
Absolutely.
You must decide, what can I do? What do I want to do? And I'm going to do it.
What a wonderful place to end.
Thank you.
And indeed, to the outsiders. Brian, Tori, thank you so much for wrapping up today with our last session of the day with such a wonderful conversation. Thanks to all of you for the first day. I believe somebody will be coming on after me, so don't rush off. But thanks again.
Thank you.
I promised you that the first day was going to be amazing. Did I meet your expectations? We have had incredible speakers, and I would just like to say that behind the scenes is a production crew who's been working on this event for 14 months, and I feel like they just went out with an absolute bang. So can we give them a round of applause? They are the absolute heroes, keeping it all running. It's like a frantic jazz improv back there. You don't want to know. We're keeping it clean and glamorous out here, I hope. We have just had such a wonderful mix of talks today and the Hive sessions, and I hope on your breaks you've gotten to chat and make connections with one another, and we're going to send you out into the world, or at least to the bar, to carry on that energy and conversations. What I'd like to do is just do a little bit of end-of-day housekeeping and then talk about tomorrow, if I may. So tomorrow we're going to have more panels, we're going to have more deep dives, we're going to have more workshops and more chances to connect. So there's basically everything that you loved about today, just more of it, day 2. What I would like you to think about if you're not coming tomorrow, we've got bins outside where you can recycle your past. So we are walking the walk on sustainability, I hope. Could you please also check out the Material Matters bookshop, which is in the foyer. There are things that you might find of interest there. And finally, connect with each other using your Design Declare cards. We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but they are in your pack, and they are cool, and you will enjoy them. And we will discuss them, I hope, later tomorrow. So take a look at those as future further ways for you to build contacts and connections. Last but not least, get home safely. It's a jungle out there. The strike is still on, but you kind of figured it out. The Elizabeth line is very close with Farrington. Buses, bikes, good old-fashioned feet. We're walking the walk on Design for Planet today. So that brings us to close for day 1. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for day 2. Thank you so much for your energy. It's been great. See you later.